Hail rattled the glass canopy of the Grand Horizon Hotel like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Rain slashed the city in crooked, silver lines, streaking the tall windows and pooling in wide, grim puddles across the marble lobby floor. Thunder cracked above, like the sky itself was being torn open. Inside the Grand Horizon, the storm was not the only thing brewing. Claudia Benton stood in the middle of the chaos, her black heels planted firmly on the soaked carpet near the entrance, arms crossed, brows furrowed in deep contempt. At 41, she was the kind of woman who never looked disheveled, even when the world did. Her tailored navy suit remained crisp. Her bun was so tight, it seemed like it held up her anger. "You call this a 5-star standard?" she snapped, pointing toward a bellboy who had just slipped on the wet tile. "Mop this mess up before one of our guests sues. And someone get that damned candle display back upright. This isn't a haunted house." She wasn't yelling to be heard. She was yelling to control. The front desk manager flinched, but said nothing. The bellboy scrambled to his feet, mumbling apologies. Two housekeeping staff whispered to each other, eyes flicking toward the exit, like they were debating whether to run. Claudia had good reason to be furious. 3 long-time employees had quit the week before, citing unreasonable working conditions and emotional distress. One had even left a letter, folded neatly into a company envelope, and left at the HR office. This place breaks people. Claudia had torn it in half without reading the rest. Now the hotel was short-staffed, underprepared, and battling both a PR crisis and a literal storm outside. "Pull dining staff from the rooftop bar," she barked at a junior supervisor. "No one's drinking martinis during a hailstorm. I want everyone down here, scrubbing, folding, organizing. I don't care if they're waiters or dishwashers. Tonight they mop." She turned sharply, her heels clicking like gunshots across the tile, and disappeared down the corridor leading to the back offices. But the storm had brought more than leaks and broken umbrellas to the Grand Horizon that night. Near the emergency stairwell at the far end of the building, tucked behind a fire door marked "No Guest Access," the air was thick with mildew and the faint scent of burned wiring. Old mop buckets sat unused next to a coil of rope and a broken vacuum. The flickering overhead light gave the space a sickly, greenish hue. It was there, half hidden behind a maintenance bin, that a tiny figure sat, curled into herself like a question mark. She didn't cry. She didn't call for help. She just sat, clutching a torn stuffed bunny, one ear hanging by a thread, its once white fur grey with soot and ash. The girl couldn't have been more than 5. Her clothes, a pastel sundress that no longer matched the weather, were damp and stained with something dark. Maybe rainwater, maybe something older. Her bare feet pressed against the cold concrete floor, knees hugged to her chest. Her hair, tangled and stuck to her face, looked as if it hadn't been brushed in days. She stared blankly at the wall across from her, not seeing, not blinking. Sophie. That was her name, though no one at the hotel knew it yet. Her parents had checked into the Grand Horizon 4 nights ago, excited for a family getaway before summer ended. A road trip, they said. The mountains, then the city. One last adventure before school began. But the crash happened on the highway just outside the city limits. A jackknifed truck. Spinning tires. Broken glass. Silence. The police report was still being written. And somehow, Sophie had wandered back to the only place she remembered, the hotel with the big glass windows and the fish tank in the lobby. She had arrived the night before, soaked, shivering, barefoot. No one had seen her then. She'd slipped through the service door just as someone was hauling in a wet catering cart. No one had questioned a small figure in the chaos, not at this hotel. And so she had stayed, hiding, watching, silent, until tonight. A commotion near the utility hallway drew Claudia's attention again. One of the newer staff, Maria, a part-timer still in high school, had gone to retrieve an old mop and screamed. Claudia Benton stormed down the back corridor of the Grand Horizon Hotel with the same energy she used to scold staff or demand silence from interns. Her heels clicked against the polished tile like a metronome of irritation. The storm outside had flooded half the main lobby. Half her staff had called in sick or quit in the last month, and now someone was shrieking by the emergency stairwell. "Seriously," she muttered, snatching her walkie from her belt. "If this is about another leaky pipe, I swear—" She rounded the corner and stopped short just as Maria, the youngest on the housekeeping team, backed away from the stairwell door with wide eyes and one hand clamped over her mouth. Claudia's eyes narrowed. "What is it now?" she growled, brushing past a rolling bin of used towels. "We have 32 rooms still unchecked. The rooftop bar smells like mildew, and I don't have time for dramatics." Maria opened her mouth, but only managed to point. Claudia followed her gaze, and then saw her, the girl, small, silent, still. She was sitting curled into herself near the base of the stairwell, knees drawn tight to her chest, her face buried in a stuffed bunny that had seen far better days. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks smudged with dirt, and her dress, if you could still call the threadbare fabric that, was soaked at the hem, sticking to her skinny legs like wet paper. For one breath, Claudia didn't move, and then her lips curled. "What the hell is this?" Maria spoke softly. She's not with anyone. I think she's been here all night." "Don't be ridiculous," Claudia snapped, stepping forward with sharp, precise steps. "You think some random child just wandered into a 5-star hotel, passed security, and decided to nap in the stairwell?" "She was hiding," Maria whispered. "In the emergency exit, I think. She's been here a while." Claudia leaned in. The girl didn't look up, didn't speak, just clutched the bunny tighter. "What's your name?" Claudia asked, her voice low and clipped. Silence. "Are your parents here? Guests? Staff?" The girl blinked once, slow and glassy-eyed, but said nothing. Claudia exhaled through her nose and straightened. Of course I'm the one who has to deal with this." Then she turned to Maria. "Call the front desk. Check guest logs from the last 72 hours. See if anyone's reported a missing child. And if you breathe a word of this to a guest, you're finished." "But, Claudia, she's freezing. She needs—" Claudia spun, voice like a slap. "She needs to stop wasting space. This is not a shelter. This is not a soup kitchen. We are not a babysitting service. We are an elite establishment fighting to stay afloat while half this generation runs off for mental health breaks and yoga retreats." She glared down at the girl. "What are you, Mute? Playing the victim? Looking for free food and sympathy? That's not how the world works, sweetheart." The girl said nothing. Claudia took another step closer, towering over her. "You want to stay here?" she said coldly. "Fine. But you'll earn it. Nothing's free." Maria gasped. "What? She's 5, 6 maybe. She's just a child." Claudia whirled around. "And this is a business, not a daycare. You want to take her home, feed her, bathe her? No? Then keep your voice down and do as you're told." She turned back to the girl. "You can sleep in the laundry closet," she barked, "behind the staff locker room. Clean linens only. No blankets disappear. No food goes missing. No talking to guests. And if I catch you near the main floor, you're gone. Understand?" Sophie still didn't move, but her fingers tightened around the bunny's ear, just slightly. Claudia smirked. "Good. You can understand." Then she looked over her shoulder. "Someone get her a uniform shirt. Whatever's in Lost and Found. Doesn't matter if it fits. Put her to work folding towels, and find a cot. Something that doesn't stink of mold." Maria didn't move. "I said now," Claudia snapped, before marching off, heels clicking, voice already barking new orders into her walkie, as if the incident had been nothing more than a misplaced trash bag. Thunder cracked overhead, loud and close. The lights in the stairwell flickered, then steadied. Maria lingered just a moment longer. The girl still hadn't moved. She sat there, barefoot, wet and wordless, hugging that torn bunny as if it were the last thing tethering her to the world. No one asked where she came from. No one asked her what she needed. No one even asked her name. And no one, not yet, understood that the small, silent figure at the bottom of the stairwell was not just lost. She had been left. Left with nothing but a memory of a hotel lobby where stars once glowed in a fish tank, and a mother's voice that had sung lullabies into the darkness. But now, even those things were slipping, and all she had left was the floor beneath her, the bunny in her arms, and a voice buried so deep inside her chest it no longer knew how to come out. The laundry closet wasn't meant to hold people. It was barely wide enough for 2 carts, a wall-mounted shelf of cleaning supplies, and a leaning stack of overwashed towels that smelled faintly of mildew. But for Sophie, it became home. Claudia had kept her word. A folding cot was dragged in, its canvas sagging and cold, and someone tossed her an old polo uniform shirt from Lost and Found, faded navy with a missing button. She wore it like armor, its hem brushing her knees. No one spoke to her the first few days, not unless they had to. She was the ghost of the service corridors, the phantom child who swept and scrubbed and vanished before sunrise. Claudia, true to her word, gave her tasks, and then more again. Bathroom tiles, she barked one morning, pointing to the basement restroom where mold crept across the grout like rot on a dying tree. Make them white, I don't care how. Carpet stains in the hallway behind the banquet kitchen, she ordered another night. Use the brush. No excuses. Sometimes Sophie worked with gloves. Most times, she didn't. Her fingers turned raw, pinked from bleach water, her small knuckles scraped and blistered. Her knees darkened with bruises. Her silence made her seem obedient, which Claudia interpreted as agreement. She never asked Sophie her last name, never filed a report, never called child services. The staff knew better than to question her decisions. She's temporary, Claudia said once, when someone dared to raise an eyebrow, fostering work ethic better than the streets. At night, when the hotel buzzed with guests and laughter trickled down from the rooftop lounge, Sophie crouched in the shadows near the staff break room, folding towels or scrubbing mop buckets. The walls there were bare. The air smelled of damp plaster and spilled soup from the kitchen above. And still, she did not cry. It wasn't that she didn't want to. Her throat ached some nights with the effort to keep the sobs buried. But crying would call attention, and attention meant punishment. So instead, she created something small, something hers, a paper crane. It started with an old cocktail menu left behind on a catering tray, its edges sticky with syrup, but mostly dry. She tore out a square, wiped it with the hem of her shirt, and folded. Her fingers remembered. Her mother had taught her once, back when their biggest worry was losing puzzle pieces under the couch. Fold corner to corner, then side to side, then tuck. The first crane was crooked, one wing bent upward like it wanted to fly but didn't know how. She hid it beneath the cot, then pulled an old biscuit tin from a junk pile behind the boiler room. The rusted lid stuck, but eventually gave way. She named the tin home too. By the end of the week, it held 7 cranes, all from discarded napkins, menus, or notepads, each folded during a stolen moment when no one was looking, when her hands weren't bleeding. That's when she met him. He was tall, wrinkled, wore a faded green cap with the hotel's logo half peeling. His name tag simply read, Arnold, exterior maintenance. He cleaned the windows. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., when the city was still exhaling night and the streetlights hadn't blinked off yet, Arnold wheeled out his gear and began his slow ritual. Bucket, squeegee, bucket again. One morning, Sophie passed him quietly, pushing a ragged mop toward the lower restrooms. Arnold didn't speak, but the next morning she found a small sandwich wrapped in a napkin set on top of her mop bucket. No note, just a triangle of peanut butter and jelly, crusts trimmed. Her favorite. She ate it in 3 bites, wiping her mouth with her sleeve. Then the next morning, he finally said something. "You fold good," he murmured, eyes still on the window. "That bird of yours." Sophie froze. Her hands clutched the empty mop handle. "I saw," he added gently. "Not gonna tell." She nodded. Her fingers flexed. He kept wiping, the slow, steady rhythm of someone who didn't need words. "Just don't let her see," he muttered, barely audible. "You know who I mean." Sophie did. Claudia. "She don't like things that don't serve a purpose," Arnold said, "and to her, joy has no purpose." He wrung out his squeegee with a grunt and pushed on toward the next window. After that, they didn't speak much, but every so often he'd leave a hard candy on the cart handle. Once, a tiny flashlight, battery barely working, but it lit up her closet like a firefly on the nights she couldn't sleep. The staff started to notice her more. Not kindly, just more. "She creeps me out," a line cook said. "She never talks," whispered a night shift janitor. "Kids like that, they snap." "I heard she just showed up out of nowhere," said a server. "Management's hush-hush. You think she's a runaway?" Claudia shut it all down with a glare. "You're not paid to gossip. You're paid to work, like her." And work Sophie did. The tile floors gleamed after she scrubbed them. The stair railings no longer squeaked. The lower bathrooms smelled of lemon instead of mildew. Her hands were always moving, her eyes rarely lifted, and the box beneath the stairs filled. 12, then 20, then 30 tiny cranes. Each time she folded, her breathing steadied. Her heart beat a little slower. The world made just a little more sense. But the punishment still came. One night, Claudia walked in unexpectedly. Sophie was crouched near the back stairwell, her hands mid-fold, with a square of room service notepad between her fingers. "What is this?" Claudia snapped, snatching the paper. Sophie flinched, her shoulders curling inward. "You think this is a game? That you get to play while everyone else is working their fingers to the bone?" She ripped the half-folded crane in 2 and tossed it to the floor. "No more of this nonsense," she barked. "Next time I catch you wasting supplies, I'll lock you in the storage freezer. See how you like that kind of silence." Sophie didn't reply. She never did. Claudia stormed off, her heels echoing down the hallway. That night, Sophie didn't fold anything. She sat in the dark, arms around her knees, rocking slowly. Her hands hurt, her back ached, and her stomach rumbled with a hunger so constant it had become normal. But inside her chest, deep, somewhere not yet broken, was a tiny voice her lips had long forgotten how to use. It whispered the number, 33. The next morning, she folded again. A single blue crane, torn from the edge of a banquet menu, tucked carefully into the rusted tin beneath the cot, and the door to the laundry closet shut quietly once more. The Grand Horizon Hotel was a chameleon. By night, it glowed like a chandelier across the skyline, warm, opulent, full of the kind of laughter that didn't echo in the service corridors. But by morning, it transformed. The music faded, the party clothes disappeared, and what remained were the quiet rituals of the loyal, the restless, and the broken-hearted. Elliot Granger belonged to the last group. He checked in every third Friday of the month without fail. Penthouse Suite 1701. The corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows that curved outward like a glass observatory. The concierge always tried to upgrade him, offered spa packages, fine dining credits, even a private rooftop dinner once, but he always declined. "I just need the view," he would say, "and hot water for tea." Elliot was a man carved from stone and softened by loss. In his late 60s, tall, with a neatly trimmed beard gone white, he wore his grief like an old coat. Present, worn in, but never discussed. His suits were always pressed, his shoes always polished. Yet there was a tiredness behind his eyes that no amount of rest could cure. He was the founder of a technology firm that had once made headlines for its medical data platform. He'd made enough money to retire twice over. But since his wife passed 5 years ago and their only daughter, Emilia, followed just a year later, Elliot's fortune had become something he rarely touched. His wealth felt useless to the girl it hadn't saved. Emilia had been 7, a rare infection, a failed diagnosis, a slow, excruciating decline in a hospital bed that reeked of disinfectant and hopelessness. Elliot had spent months afterward rereading her final text. "I just want to come home, Dad." He came to the Grand Horizon not for luxury, but for the silence. For the early mornings when the city was grey and still, and the world felt as hollow as he did. Every day of his stay, Elliot descended to the lobby at precisely 6 a.m. He brought a leather-bound notebook, a thermos of green tea, and chose the same chair, third from the left, beside the eastern window, where the light touched the marble just so. He never talked to other guests, never answered his phone. He just sat, watching. But on the 4th morning of this visit, something changed. He had just finished pouring his tea when a small figure caught his eye. At first, it was just movement, a blur of navy fabric and 2 small shoes behind the lobby bar. Then the form came into focus. A little girl. She was wiping the marble counter with both hands, the cloth slipping from her grip every few seconds. Her sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, revealing arms thin as reeds, the skin red and irritated. She had to stretch to reach the far side of the bar. There was a smudge of chocolate near the edge, perhaps from a spilled dessert the night before. She wasn't strong enough to scrub it away completely, but she kept trying, over and over. Elliot's brow furrowed. She looked like she belonged in a school cafeteria, not behind a bar in a luxury hotel. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, watching her movements, deliberate, careful, exhausted. Then she paused to adjust the cloth, and in that brief moment, she looked up. Her eyes met his, and time folded in on itself. Elliot felt his chest seize. For a heartbeat, he couldn't breathe. Those eyes, large, brown, fragile, but unflinching. It was like being punched with memory. His daughter had those same eyes, not in shape or color, but in weight. That same quiet ache. That same question behind the stare. Are you seeing me, or are you just looking? He had seen that look the day before. Emilia was intubated. When she squeezed his hand, lips too dry to speak. That gaze had haunted him ever since, and now it was here, in a girl half hidden behind a bar. He blinked once. The moment passed. The girl looked down again and resumed scrubbing. Her movements were slower now, more cautious. She'd seen him watching, but she didn't run, didn't smile, didn't wave. She just kept wiping. Elliot sat back, his tea untouched. Minutes passed. He opened his notebook, but the pen hovered uselessly above the page. He wrote a single line, scratched it out, then closed the cover. When the lobby began to stir with life, staff opening curtains, luggage carts squeaking, the scent of coffee crawling through the air, he stood and quietly returned to the elevator. No one noticed. No one, except Sophie. That afternoon, Claudia summoned her to the kitchen storage area. "You wiped the bar this morning?" she asked, arms crossed, voice tight. Sophie nodded. Claudia narrowed her eyes. "Did you talk to anyone?" Shake of the head. "Anyone talk to you?" Another shake. Claudia stepped closer. "You were seen." Sophie's stomach dropped. "Lucky for you," Claudia said slowly. "The man you stared at is too rich to care and too sad to remember. But next time, you hide when guests come through. We can't have charity cases in full view." She pressed a mop into Sophie's hands. "Lobby corners, under the furniture, no missed spots." Sophie nodded and scurried away. But something had shifted. She didn't understand why that man's eyes had made her freeze, or why hers had made him pause. But in her tiny chest, buried beneath fear and silence, something fluttered. A whisper of a feeling she had long forgotten. Recognition. And upstairs, Elliot Granger sat on the edge of his bed, tea still full in the thermos, notebook untouched, and stared out across the city skyline. He couldn't stop thinking about her, not because she looked like his daughter, but because for the first time in months, maybe years, he had felt something. A flicker, a spark. And in that spark was a question that refused to be quieted. Who is that little girl? The next morning, Elliot came down earlier than usual. It was 5:47 a.m. when he entered the lobby, his polished shoes silent against the polished marble. The world outside was still asleep, the rain from the night before now only a mist clinging to the windows. Streetlights blinked. Somewhere far away, a garbage truck rumbled down an alley. He didn't sit in his usual chair by the window. Instead, he walked to the reception desk. The night clerk, young, slightly disheveled, probably near the end of a long shift, looked up in surprise. "Mr. Granger," he said, smoothing his blazer, "can I help you with something?" "Yes," Elliot replied, voice smooth but firm. "I'd like to know when the Grand Horizon started employing children." The words hung in the air like frost. The clerk blinked. I'm sorry?" Elliot leaned slightly forward, placing his leather gloves on the counter. "I saw her again this morning," he said. "The little girl behind the bar yesterday. Same uniform, same pale face. She couldn't be more than 5. A pause. The clerk glanced around, visibly uncomfortable. "Oh, her," he said, forcing a small laugh. "That's, she's the head chef's kid. Comes in sometimes. Plays house, you know. Pretends she's part of the crew. Harmless." Elliot's expression didn't change. The clerk shifted his weight. "Kids like that love to imitate grown-ups. We told her to stay in the back, but she's always sneaking around. Curious thing." Elliot said nothing. Instead, he tapped 2 fingers on the wooden counter. Once. Then again. Then slowly picked up his gloves. The clerk cleared his throat. "We try to keep her out of the way, sir. She's not on payroll, obviously. Just a kid being a kid." "A kid being a kid," Elliot repeated softly. He nodded once, the corners of his mouth drawn in a line. "Right." He turned and walked toward the lounge without another word. The clerk exhaled in relief and made a note to alert Claudia. Guests asking questions never ended well. Elliot sat at his usual seat by the eastern window, thermos of tea untouched. The sunrise hadn't broken the clouds, leaving the city draped in dull blue light. In his notebook, he scribbled a single line. "A child doesn't work that hard. For fun." He closed the book. His mind kept replaying what he saw. The child's trembling hands as she scrubbed the counter, her too big shirt with sleeves rolled up past bruised elbows, the flick of her eyes toward him and then quickly away. She wasn't just mimicking the grown-ups. She was working, with the urgency of someone who knew that failure came with punishment, not praise. The lie he'd been told rattled in his chest. A child being a child. No child should carry that much silence in her shoulders. He stayed in the lobby longer than usual, hoping to see her again. But she didn't appear. Instead, Claudia walked through an hour later, clipboard in hand, barking at a bellhop to adjust a luggage cart display. Elliot watched her, controlled, sharp, clean lines from her bun to her blazer. He rose from his seat and approached. "Miss Benton," he said. She turned, caught off guard by his sudden nearness. "Mr. Granger," she said, with a quick professional smile. "How can I help?" "I asked your night clerk about the little girl cleaning your bar yesterday," Elliot said. "He claims she's the chef's daughter." Claudia didn't flinch. "Yes," she said smoothly. "That's right. Little Sophie, chef's niece technically. Her parents are away. We're helping out." Elliot's gaze narrowed. "She's very dedicated," he said. "Scrubbing chocolate off marble at 6 a.m. is no small feat for a 5-year-old. Claudia laughed softly, like she found his concern quaint. "She insists on helping," she said. "We've tried to send her home with her uncle, but she throws fits, says she wants to work like the grown-ups. You know how kids are." "No," Elliot replied evenly. "I don't." Claudia's smile wavered. He let the silence stretch, let her feel it. Then he inclined his head slightly. "I hope the labor laws still apply here. I'd hate to see this hotel in the papers for all the wrong reasons." Claudia's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Elliot stepped back. "Enjoy your morning," and with that, he returned to his seat. The hotel carried on as usual. The scent of breakfast crept in from the kitchen. Jazz played softly from invisible speakers. A concierge helped a businesswoman print boarding passes, but Elliot's mind wasn't in the room. He thought of Amelia again, his daughter. The way she had once sat beside him on the floor of his study, folding origami cranes while he worked. The way she'd say, "Look, Daddy, it flies," and toss it into the air, giggling as it fluttered and fell. One night, not long before she got sick, she asked him, "What happens to cranes that never get finished?" He hadn't known how to answer. And now, that question echoed. What happens to the cranes that never get finished? What happens to little girls like Sophie? That evening, he sat by the bar instead of his usual table, a choice that surprised even the bartender, who had never seen Mr. Granger order anything more daring than hot tea. But Elliot didn't order. He waited. And then, there she was. Sophie appeared near the back hallway, carrying a bucket and sponge. She moved slowly, careful not to splash. Her uniform shirt hung off one shoulder now, and there was a red mark across her wrist. She didn't notice him watching. He stayed quiet, letting her begin wiping down the lower glass panels of the bar. When she stepped closer, he said softly, "That's a lot of work for such small hands." She jumped, looked up. Recognition flared in her eyes, but she didn't speak. He smiled gently. "Do you like working here?" No answer. "Do they treat you well?" Still nothing. He set a wrapped chocolate square on the bar. "I'm Elliot." She stared at the chocolate, then looked up again. "I know it's hard," he said, lowering his voice, "but you don't have to do this forever." A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Then Claudia's voice rang out from across the lobby. "Sophie, upstairs. Now." The girl froze. Claudia didn't see Elliot at first, her attention laser-focused on the child. "I said now." Sophie grabbed her bucket and bolted without a word. Claudia turned and saw him. Their eyes locked. And for the first time, Claudia Benton did not smile. Elliot Granger had built an empire on asking the right questions. In boardrooms, in courtrooms, in negotiations that had made or broken companies. He had always known which question would make someone flinch, what silence would reveal, and when a door was only pretending to be locked. And now, at the grand horizon, he felt that same instinct return, not with spreadsheets or corporate takeovers, but with something far more fragile. A little girl, Sophie. He hadn't heard her name aloud, not officially, not from Claudia or the front desk or the staff who darted their eyes away whenever he asked. It had come from her lips once, barely audible, when she muttered it to herself after scraping her knuckles on the tile grout in the lobby. Sophie, she had whispered, like she was reminding herself it was real. Elliot had tucked that name away, like a secret. And now he began to investigate. Not openly. That would raise suspicion, and Claudia was already watching him like a hawk circling the field. He moved quietly, asking small questions, phrasing things casually, compliments to the cleaning staff, idle remarks at the concierge desk, polite curiosity disguised as old man rambling. But everywhere he asked, the answers were the same. Shrugs, evasive smiles, awkward silences. No one knew where the girl slept. No one had seen any paperwork. No ID, no birth certificate, no emergency contact. No room assigned to her. No family visits. She wasn't on any list, but she was always working. She's just here, one laundry attendant said. Been here a while. Kinda like the boiler noise. You notice it, but eventually you stop asking why. Another woman, folding towels, murmured, "She was crying in the linen closet last week. Claudia said if anyone mentioned it again, we'd be written up." It was clear now. Sophie didn't exist on paper, but she existed. She existed in the bruises on her wrists, the way she flinched when shoes squeaked too close behind her, the silence in her mouth where there should have been laughter. And Elliot had had enough. That night, after a particularly cold tea and a dinner he didn't touch, he returned to the lower levels of the hotel. The halls were quieter there, cement floors, buzzing lights, the occasional hiss of steam through an overhead pipe. The luxury upstairs didn't reach this far down. He passed a vending machine that blinked out of order in faded red, turned the corner toward the service lift, and stopped. Grace was waiting. She was a small woman, maybe in her 70s, wiry and bent at the shoulders, wearing a utility apron that hadn't been new in a decade. She had worked at the Grand Horizon longer than anyone, and yet barely anyone knew her name. She kept to herself, cleaned what others forgot, listened to things not meant for her ears. She looked up at Elliot with eyes that had seen too much. "You're not the first person to notice her," she said quietly. "But you might be the first who's willing to do something." Elliot didn't speak. He let her continue. "Most just look away, pretend she's part of the building. But I've seen her fingers shake so hard she can't hold the mop. I've seen her asleep under the stairs in a ball so small she could fit in a suitcase." Grace reached into her apron and pulled out an old brass key, slightly tarnished, the edges worn from time. She held it out. "Take this." Elliot took it gently. "Rooms in the technical sub-level," she continued. 2 floors below the laundry chute. No cameras, no foot traffic. Nobody goes there unless they're trying to disappear. She met his gaze. "Look in the equipment room marked T-2B, but not before 10 p.m. Claudia does a sweep around 9:30. If she sees you down there, she'll know." Elliot nodded slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm too old to stop her," Grace said. "And you're not." Her voice didn't tremble, her hands didn't shake, but there was something behind her words, something hollow, like a wound that had scabbed over without healing. Elliot placed a hand over hers. "Thank you." She pulled away before he could say more, and vanished into the dark hallway like a ghost slipping back into the walls. At 10:12 p.m., Elliot descended the back stairwell. He didn't take the elevator, too noisy, too traceable. Instead, he followed the faint hum of machinery and the occasional rustle of mice down the metal staircase, past the floor marked basement, past the one marked sub-basement, until he reached the level that had no name on the wall. It smelled like old rubber, diesel, and something wetter, like mop water that had gone sour. The walls here were concrete, and the lights flickered more than they stayed lit. He passed unused hotel equipment, old signage, rusted trolleys, a dismantled soda machine, until he reached the door marked T2B. He paused, slipped the key into the lock, turned it. It clicked. The door creaked open with effort. It hadn't been oiled in years. And then, silence. The room beyond was colder than the hallway. The light overhead flickered weakly, revealing a narrow, windowless space filled with machinery. Boilers, backup generators, tangled coils of thick black cables. But that wasn't what made Elliot's throat tighten. It was the cot. In the far corner, beneath a cracked utility shelf, was a small metal frame with a flattened mattress. On it, a threadbare blanket, a dented tin lunchbox, and a stuffed bunny. Missing an eye, one ear sewn back on with pink thread. Next to it, a pile of folded paper. Crane. Dozens of them, made from menus, order sheets, napkins. Sophie's world. Elliot walked slowly, as though afraid to disturb it. He crouched beside the cot, lifted one of the cranes. It was delicate, precise, folded with hands that had found calm in the chaos. And Claudia had stuffed it all in the basement, out of sight, like trash, like clutter, like something to be hidden. Elliot stood slowly, eyes burning, not with rage, but with something colder, sharper, conviction. He reached for his phone and took photos of everything, the cot, the cranes, the bunny, the room itself. He stepped out into the hallway and locked the door behind him. As he climbed the stairs, 2 words pulsed in his chest. Not again. 10:45 p.m. The sub-basement hallway hummed with the low, constant churn of machinery. Steam hissed through pipes above, and fluorescent bulbs flickered like dying stars. It was the kind of place that made silence feel like something alive, lurking just out of reach, waiting to collapse on anyone who dared disturb it. Elliot Granger moved with purpose. He was no longer just curious, no longer simply concerned. He had seen where Sophie slept. He had seen the bruises. He had seen enough. The cranes, the bunny, the cramped corner of a forgotten world. Those images haunted him with every step. As he descended to the lowest level of the technical wing, a new sound joined the hum. Water, rushing from a pipe or faucet, echoing off the concrete like a warning bell. And then, a voice. Sharp. Bitter. You think that's clean? Look at it. You lazy brat, start again. Claudia. Elliot stopped just before the corner, pressing his back to the cold wall. Another voice followed, small, muffled. The sound of a wet rag being slapped against metal. Then the unmistakable sound of a child crying, but with no sound. Just the breathy hiccups of someone trying not to be heard. He stepped forward. The door ahead was marked, Service, Wash Bay. A yellowed safety sign hung crooked beside it, warning of slippery surfaces in peeling red letters. Elliot wrapped his fingers around the rusted handle and pushed. The door creaked open slowly, groaning like it hadn't been used in years. And then he saw it. A cavernous utility room, and in the center, Claudia Benton, sleeves rolled up, arms crossed, lips curled in disdain. Standing in front of her, on hands and knees, was Sophie. She was scrubbing the floor with trembling hands, her fingers raw, knuckles red and bleeding. Her knees, pressed against the wet tile, were swollen and bruised in deep shades of purple. The child looked like she had shrunk into herself, too small, too thin, too quiet to be real. Elliot stepped into the room. Enough. His voice wasn't loud, but it was made of iron. Claudia turned, startled. Her mouth opened to speak, but closed again when she saw his face. He walked slowly towards Sophie and knelt down, the edge of his coat sweeping the floor. "Don't touch her again," he said softly, but with the weight of thunder. Not another second. Not another word. This ends now. Claudia recovered quickly. She's nothing, she spat, eyes narrowing. She's not even on the system. She's trash that washed up here. I feed her. I give her a roof. That's more than she deserves. Elliot looked at Sophie, her arms trembling under the weight of the sponge, her face pale and blank with exhaustion. He took off his coat, the tailored wool still warm from his body, and wrapped it gently around the girl's shoulders. She's not trash, he said, his voice breaking. She's a child. Claudia scoffed. She's a problem. One I kept out of sight for the sake of your comfort. You all sip your tea and pretend this place is perfect, but someone has to clean the rot underneath. You're the rot, Elliot said calmly. Not her. He rose slowly, cradling Sophie against his side as she clung to his shirt with weak fingers. You think you're some kind of savior, Claudia barked. You don't know where she came from. You don't know what she is. I know what she's not, Elliot replied. She's not yours. She's not mine. But she is someone. And she deserves a childhood. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. I have photos of her living conditions, of the illegal quarters you shoved her into, of her injuries. Claudia's expression faltered. I've already sent copies to 3 journalists I trust, and to a child welfare attorney. I suggest you start looking for your lawyer. You can't. I can, he cut in, and I will. He stepped back toward the door, cradling Sophie closer. You treated her like trash, but she's going to be more than anything you could ever understand. Claudia moved to block the door, fury rising in her throat, but Elliot had already tapped a number into his phone. Operator, he said, I need police and child protective services dispatched to the Grand Horizon Hotel, sub-basement level. There's a child in immediate danger. Claudia froze. I'm Elliot Granger, he continued, his voice crisp. Yes, that Elliot Granger. And I have photographic evidence of child abuse and neglect on the premises. I suggest they come quickly. He ended the call and stared at Claudia. You've made a mistake, she whispered, her confidence unraveling. You think people will believe you. You think this hotel will survive a scandal like this. Elliot stepped into the hallway with Sophie in his arms. I don't care if the hotel survives, he said over his shoulder. I care if she does. Outside, the air had turned sharp and electric, like the sky knew a storm was coming. Elliot waited in the lobby, holding Sophie tightly, as police cars and an unmarked welfare vehicle pulled up to the valet lane. He gave his statement clearly, succinctly. The officers nodded, took his phone, downloaded the images, and made their way downstairs. Claudia was arrested without ceremony, handcuffed, red-faced, hurling words that echoed off the marble columns of the lobby. Sophie didn't flinch. Elliot sat beside her on one of the velvet lobby benches, gently holding her hand. You're safe now, he said. She looked up at him, her lips parted slightly. No sound came, but there was something in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Not fear, not pain. A spark. By morning, the Grand Horizon Hotel was no longer known for its skyline views or its rooftop jazz. It was trending on every major platform for something else entirely. Breaking, luxury hotel, accused of child labor and abuse. Millionaire whistleblower speaks out. From penthouse to police raid, Granger's alarming discovery beneath Grand Horizon. Justice for the silent girl. A city awakes. The first camera crew arrived before the sun had fully risen. Then came the reporters, the legal teams, the city investigators, and by midday, a formal statement from the mayor's office. Within 24 hours, The Grand Horizon's pristine marble floors were crowded not by luggage carts and bellboys, but by state officials, digital forensic experts, and social workers in sensible shoes carrying clipboards and quiet rage. Inside a sealed conference room, the hotel's surveillance server was being restored under court order. Years of missing footage, previously marked corrupted, was now being reconstructed frame by frame. And what they found was not only damning, it was systematic. Camera footage showed Sophie scrubbing toilets, folding linens, and pushing mop buckets almost half her size. At least 4 different areas of the hotel had footage of her working alone in the early hours. In one silent clip, Claudia could be seen standing over her with a rolled towel clenched like a whip. But it didn't stop there. A secondary audit of the hotel's payroll revealed something far more calculated. A string of phantom employees, Ava, Claire, MJ, none of whom had ever shown up to work. Their names had been used to file timesheets, with the cash collected off record, likely to avoid suspicion and fund internal bribes. Worse still, several of the hotel's longtime staff had been let go abruptly over the past year, each one filing vague complaints about hostile conditions, none of which were ever properly investigated. Now, with the footage aired, the false payroll exposed, and a child in protective custody, the silence that once echoed through the Grand Horizon cracked wide open, and the faces that had smiled for years began to change. In the employee lounge, Grace, the elderly cleaning staff who had handed Elliot the key, sat quietly with a cup of tea, watching the news on the small mounted TV. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. "She's the reason I stayed," she told an investigator later. "That little girl. I cleaned the floors, but she swept something out of me I thought had died a long time ago." Downstairs, a valet admitted on camera, "We all knew something was off, but Claudia made it so clear. If you talk, you're gone. And in this city, a job like this, it's your lifeline." More employees came forward. "I saw her being dragged by the arm once," said a line cook. "I tried to ask Claudia about it. She told me, 'One more question, and you're next. I've got 3 kids.' I stayed quiet. But not anymore. In public, Claudia Benton was no longer the composed hotel executive in tailored blazers and polished heels. She had been arrested in the sub-basement, shrieking and resisting, fighting against the cuffs like they were insults rather than consequences. "You have no idea who I am," she had screamed at the officers. "I built this place." No one responded. No one defended her. Her staff didn't line up for character references. The hotel's owner didn't issue a word of support. The legal team quietly replaced her name in the management directory by noon the next day. The illusion was gone. And Elliot Granger. He didn't hide from the attention. At a press conference held just outside the hotel's glass doors, now covered with police tape, he stood before a row of microphones, simple in his grey coat, the same one he had wrapped around Sophie. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Granger, how did you discover the girl? Was this personal for you? Did you know about the abuse before this week?" He raised a hand. "I don't want this story to be about me," he said. "But let me say this. No one, no matter how small, no matter how voiceless, should ever be punished for needing help. No one should pay for their own innocence with bruises. No one should trade their childhood for someone else's profit." He paused. Compassion is not weakness. It is the most sacred kind of strength. He took a breath, voice low but steady. "And no one," he said, eyes locked on the camera, "should have to pay for kindness with scars." It was the quote that would echo across the internet, inscribed on headlines and reposted by advocates around the world. No one should pay for kindness with scars. Elliot Granger. He didn't stay to bask in praise. He declined interviews. He left the podium and walked out to the side exit, where a black sedan waited quietly. Inside was Sophie. She sat in the back seat, bundled in a new sweater, hair combed, but eyes still watchful. The social worker beside her smiled gently, letting her clutch a fresh copy of her stuffed bunny. New fabric, same pink thread on the ear. She didn't speak. Not yet. But when Elliot opened the door and sat beside her, she reached for his hand, gripped it, and for the first time in days, he smiled. Inside the Grand Horizon, the cleanup had only begun. But outside, on social media, on morning radio shows, in school classrooms and family kitchens, a story had taken root. A story not just about a hotel scandal, but about a child who had been hidden in plain sight. About the man who saw her, and the lie that was too big to stay quiet. The city was watching. The country was listening. And far away, in the quiet moments between the headlines and the justice yet to come, a little girl sat next to a man who had once lost everything, and who now, perhaps, had found something again. The weeks following Claudia Benton's arrest unfolded like ripples on a still lake, at first small and local, then widening into something far more enduring. Investigations exposed a long history of abuse and concealment, not only at the Grand Horizon Hotel, but in other properties under the same management. But amid the hearings and headlines, one story held the world's gaze: the little girl who had been hidden in a basement, and the man who found her. Sophie was placed under emergency protective care immediately following the incident. But Elliot Granger didn't wait for the system to decide her fate. He began the adoption process the moment he knew she had no living relatives, presenting not just his legal readiness, but his unwavering intent to give her more than safety. He wanted to give her a home. 6 weeks later, the court finalized the process. And so, with the stroke of a pen, Sophie Amelia Granger was no longer just a name whispered between caseworkers and hospital files. She was someone's daughter again. Elliot brought her to a quiet, sunlit house on the edge of the coast, far from the cold marble and concrete of the hotel basement. The windows faced the sea. The garden bloomed with soft lavender and hydrangeas. In the mornings, she helped him water the plants, still in her pajamas, her small hand wrapped around a yellow plastic watering can. The nightmares lessened, her shoulders relaxed. Her words, once trapped behind clenched silence, began to return, first in scribbled drawings, then in questions about the stars, the tides, and the names of clouds. She started school that fall, in a small classroom where no one knew her story, only her name. She wasn't the loudest nor the fastest, but she was always kind. Her teachers said she listened with intensity, as if every word mattered. Elliot, too, found something shifting inside him. Grief, once a heavy coat he wore into every room, began to loosen its grip. His daughter Amelia had never truly left him, but now her memory lived on in a new kind of love. Not a replacement, never that, but a continuation, a reason to look forward instead of only back. He kept the cranes Sophie once folded in a glass case on his writing desk, not as decoration, but as a reminder of survival, of resilience, and of the paper-thin boundary between being seen and being forgotten. But Elliot couldn't ignore the truth he now understood far too well. Sophie was not the only one. So, with the same meticulous care he had once used to build a tech empire, he set to work on something greater than profit or prestige. He purchased an old coastal property, once a retreat center, now long abandoned, and turned it into the Amelia House, a warm, sprawling sanctuary for children who had been abused, neglected, or displaced. Not a sterile shelter, but a real home. It had music lessons in the sunroom, therapy sessions that felt like storytelling, and walls filled with art from tiny, trembling hands learning how to hold a brush again. Each child had their own room, their own books, their own name etched in brass outside their door. Staff were trained not just in childcare, but in listening, in noticing the signs of the unseen wounds. No child was forced to talk, but every child was shown they mattered. And when one was ready to speak, someone was always there. From there, Elliot expanded his efforts, not with fanfare, but with determination. He created emergency funds for social workers and trauma counselors. He sponsored legal aid teams to fight for children trapped in bureaucratic neglect. He supported grassroots organizations in cities across the country, ensuring that no child would be forced to sleep on a laundry room cot ever again. He never accepted awards. He never gave speeches. When asked why, he only ever answered, "Because the ones who need saving usually aren't holding microphones." As for Sophie, she flourished in her own quiet way. She loved sea glass. She collected the smooth green and blue pieces after every storm and lined them along her bedroom windowsill. She painted in broad strokes, sometimes in silence, sometimes to the soft hum of classical music Elliot played in the evenings. Her paintings often had cranes in them, but now they flew across skies filled with light. She kept the old biscuit tin, the one where she had once hidden folded paper birds under a staircase. Inside it now were photographs. Her first day of school, her first finished painting, her first birthday party where she was the one being sung to. And tucked beneath those photos, one final crane remained, creased, a little frayed at the corners. She never unfolded it. She never needed to, because that crane wasn't just memory. It was proof that even in the dark, something fragile could survive. And now, thrive. In time, other children came to the Amelia house. Some afraid, some angry, some who hadn't spoken a word in years. Sophie didn't try to fix them. She simply sat beside them, sometimes with a crayon, sometimes with a paper square. And when they asked her, "Does it get better?" she didn't answer with words. She handed them a crane and smiled. What we learn from Sophie's story. There are stories we read, and then there are stories that change us. Sophie's journey, from a forgotten child in a hotel basement to a beloved daughter and symbol of hope, reminds us of something essential yet often overlooked: the power of being seen. In a world that moves quickly, it's easy to overlook the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the children who clean floors instead of playing, who sleep on rags instead of beds, who fold paper cranes in the dark instead of laughing in the light. But Sophie's story is not just about injustice, it's about what happens when one person decides not to look away. Elliot didn't plan to become a father again. He didn't arrive at that hotel expecting to change a life. In fact, for a long time, he couldn't even lift himself out of grief. And yet, in the stillness of one early morning, he noticed a little girl wiping a chocolate stain off a bar counter, her hands shaking, her eyes too heavy for someone so small. That moment, simple, silent, was where everything began. Because sometimes, all it takes is a second of courage to break a cycle of suffering. Through Elliot's decision to act, we learn that compassion isn't just a feeling, it's a choice. And it's often an uncomfortable one. It asks us to step into shadows we'd rather avoid, to speak when silence feels safer, to care deeply, even when it's inconvenient. Sophie didn't have a voice for a long time, but now her story speaks for thousands of others like her, and the lessons echo far beyond the pages. Children are not problems to be managed. They are people to be protected. Every child, regardless of where they're born or how quietly they live, deserves to be safe, to be loved, and to belong. Grief doesn't have to end our stories, it can transform them. Elliot's healing didn't begin with forgetting the daughter he lost. It began when he allowed love to return in a new form. Change doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes, the most world-shifting actions begin with a simple choice to care. A glance, a question, a moment of paying attention. Every paper crane matters. Even the small things we create in pain can become symbols of strength. Even a child who folds birds in secret can rise to inspire a movement of light. And perhaps most powerfully of all, there is no such thing as someone else's child. If a child is hurting, if a child is silenced, neglected, or lost, it becomes all of our responsibility to act. Whether we're parents, teachers, neighbors, or strangers, we have the power to notice, to intervene, to protect. Sophie's story is fictional, but it's heartbreakingly real in the world we live in. Right now, there are children like her, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to care enough to ask the right question. Let's not wait until their silence becomes unbearable. Let's notice. Let's listen. Let's be the kind of people who leave the light on for someone else. Now it's your turn. Have you ever witnessed something that didn't feel right, but weren't sure whether to speak up? What would you do today if you saw a child like Sophie, tired, quiet, and alone, in your neighborhood, your school, or your workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments. Someone might need to hear your story today. And if this message touched your heart, consider sharing it, to remind others that no child should ever be left unseen.